You're listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories.
I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane roads through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side, and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for a satanic group activity. So I was driving myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I was driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. And up ahead, I saw some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approached, I slowed down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stopped about 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Being a Marine, I reached under the seat and pulled out a 9mm pistol and chambered around. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. That was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it, or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple of 100 feet, and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw the two bodies had gotten up to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and the bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow, I don't think it would have been good. Sometimes, real life can be scarier than a movie. I'm not much for the supernatural, and I'm somewhat skeptical by nature. But I also think it's hasty to dismiss the supernatural as being non-existent, and I have to admit that there are some things I just can't explain. I think we tend to be more in tune to things like when we're kids, and that we lose some of that sixth sense as we grow up. When I was young, there was a back bedroom in my grandparents' basement that scared me to death. Here's the thing, though. It wasn't your stereotypical basement. It was a finished basement, well lighted, nothing spooky about it. The bedroom was empty and unused, and honestly, nothing that should have been particularly creepy about it at all. But every time I would start down the hallway towards that back bedroom, my ears would start to ring. The closer I got to the doorway, the louder the noise in my head would become, and I would be nearly overwhelmed by a sense of dread, as though something terrible were about to happen. Rather than avoiding it, I was one of those kids who liked to scare myself. I played at my grandparents' house quite a bit growing up, so every so often I would venture alone down the hallway as close as I dared to the room, before the noise would grow too loud, and I would turn around and run back upstairs. One day, when I was maybe 8 or 9, I decided I was going to make it into that bedroom no matter what. I was determined not to chicken out. By the time I made it to the threshold of the doorway, the noise was so loud it was almost unbearable. I held my breath, walked across the threshold, and silence. Not only did the ringing in my head stop, but it was completely and utterly silent. It was a stifling silence, as if noise were somehow absorbed in that room. I couldn't hear the noise of anyone upstairs, no ambient hum of lights or air ducts, not even my own breathing. Nothing. I looked around the room for a few minutes, satisfied that there was nothing to be afraid of, or even anything to be notable besides the odd silence. The moment I walked out the door, the noises exploded. It was ear-shattering, like a scream, and absolutely deafening. I ran down the hall as fast as I could, and up the stairs. A few years later, my grandpa moved his office into that bedroom. I wasn't ever in that room by myself again, and when I was in there with him, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the noise in the hallway and the silence in the bedroom seemed to have disappeared. One day, when I was 12, I overheard my grandma tell my mom, "I don't know why he keeps his office in there. That's where the Landry's son hung himself before we bought the house. I just think it's creepy." It didn't really freak me out so much, as it just seemed to make a little more sense of the whole thing. I think that if there are some sort of forces beyond what we can see and touch, and if those forces are impacted in some way by our actions in life, I could be convinced that this could offer some explanation of what I experienced as a child in my grandparents' basement. I don't think the room was haunted by the kid's ghost or anything like that, but I think it's possible that perhaps things like murder or suicide leave behind some sort of echo or resonance, to the point that it could be sensed by another person years later. Bonus. Make it 3 for Tuesday. I moved into a house about 3 years ago when I was married. It's not that old, built in 1991, but there was an odd moment at the closing when the broker said something about disclosing any incidents of death in the house, and the sellers got a little edgy and reiterated that they had only had to disclose deaths caused by something other than natural causes, and that there were none. Well, my marriage was on the rocks before the move, and this house was kind of a final attempt for us to be happy together. But it failed, and my wife had moved out within 6 weeks of us moving in. So I found myself living there with my black lab with no furniture except a bed in the bedroom and a beanbag and an elliptical trainer in the living room. Not having any furniture and being too broke to buy any, my dog and I took advantage of the space by playing a lot of fetch in the house. One night, I was lying on the beanbag watching television and tossing the ball across the room into the kitchen for the dog over and over, when suddenly he came to a sliding stop right where the kitchen table would have been. He backpedaled on the slick floor and then launched into a flurry of barking and growling at the air. Now, I was sitting there dumbfounded because I have a completely unobstructed view of all of this, and there's nothing there. I walked over to where he was at, picked up the ball and handed it back to him, and he hurriedly and nervously backed out of the kitchen and then went into the living room as fast as he could. As soon as we were in the living room, he was ready to play again like nothing happened. As a test, I threw the ball back again, and again he freaked out as soon as he was in the kitchen. But again, there was nothing there. I walked through the entire kitchen looking for anything that could be setting him off, but there was nothing. Obviously, I was going to keep throwing the ball into the kitchen to keep trying to figure out what was going on, and he nervously growled a little the third time, but did get his ball, and after a couple of more throws, it was like nothing had ever happened. Weird. So a couple of nights later, I was washing dishes, and I set a cup on the counter. It slid right across the entire length of the counter, like a freaky poltergeist moment. So I pulled another cup out of the dishwater. I set it on the counter, and it too slid, but not as far. I chalked this up to the cups being wet and hydroplaning on the counter or something, because maybe it wasn't quite level. I don't know. I've never been able to repeat the results. Again, weird. few days later, I was running on my elliptical. I had my shirt off, just feeling the burn, trying to run off some of the stress, etc. Well, I felt someone put their hands on my back, and I jumped like a foot in the air and almost fell off the damn machine. Of course, there was nobody there. I'll admit I was a little shaken up, but I got back into the rhythm of things and refocused. But not 2 minutes later, I felt it again. That was enough elliptical for me that night, and it freaked me out enough that I've actually never run on it with my shirt off again. In the past year, aside from the front door having a tendency to open on its own, I haven't experienced any other freaky incidents. I hope I don't experience any more.